Hello, I'm John Grom, and this is the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Right and Left is a nonprofit corporation committed to the promotion of civil political discourse. Our sole purpose is to urge voters to be a more insistent voice in the political process by demanding respectful dialogue and a commitment to finding common ground. We are currently involved in another Washington deadlock, which threatens to create another round of economic chaos. Our elected leaders are taking extreme partisan positions, and commentators and pundits are chiming in with their own brand of uncivilized rhetoric. Today, with that in mind, we're going to discuss civility itself, or more to the point, incivility, and how, when, and why incivility occurs, and some of its many forms. Crude language, insults, name-calling, violence, incivility is present and growing. The incivility that we're going to discuss today is the kind that is rooted in anger. Whenever and wherever the issues of the day are discussed, anger is certain to be lurking in the background. And when it emerges, all reasonable discussion stops. The Polish-American Rabbi, Abraham Hessel, believes that in a controversy, the moment we lose anger, we have already ceased striving for the truth and have begun striving for ourselves. Our panelists today, who are going to try to dissect the problem of incivility, are Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired research chemist and eclectic thinker. On his left is Sharon Ray, member of the Ohio Central Committee and former Medina County Commissioner. On her left is Jerry Ritzman, vice president and partner of Ritzman Pharmacies and an active community pharmacist. We'll begin our discussion today with Ron Chamberlin. Ron, as you know, people often form opinions, sometimes intractable opinions, based on factors that are outside of the issues at hand, and find it very difficult to give a fair hearing to another point of view. Have you had personal experience trying to reach common ground with someone under these circumstances?
John, it's always interesting to hear what description you're going to give me for these things and see what I have to live up to. No pressure, of course. Well, fortunately, I've not had a great deal of difficulty with just that, being anger, but certainly have been some differences of opinion with folks. And I've got a couple of anecdotal examples, two of which I was a hero and one of which I was the goat. Having a discussion, this was some years ago, back in Connecticut, with a young man, and I had been involved in the local theater scene for quite some time, and we were discussing homosexuality, and as traditionally and stereotypically, the theater scene is where many of these folks are. Well, became interested in it, began doing the study and the research on the basis for this, the sociological and the biological basis, and became convinced that it is biological in origin. And I can go into detail if you care to, but anyway. So having a discussion with this gentleman, a young...
They put you on the spot with that.
Well, okay. A young man, a young African-American man, and we were talking about it. I knew him to be from a conservative religious background, and he said, well, I don't understand. I said, why should it be that? Why can't these people change? And I says, you know, they can no more change this than you can change being black. That stopped him short. And we went on from there to discuss a little bit about it, and there was no anger involved, and I don't know if I changed his thinking or not, but at least I gave him a couple of ideas. And that's always been my approach, to try to get some information behind it so that when I do respond with a bit of anger, and I'm a type A personality that I try to keep under control, not always successfully, but I try to after the initial flush of emotion, I try to respond to that. One of which I was the goat was I met a lady who had an organic produce farm, and I made some smart alecky comment about, well, you know, all those organic fertilizers like sodium phosphate and potassium nitrate and so forth that you use. So she proceeded to read me the Riot Act pretty well. And so she got a bit upset about it, and I realized that, okay, I was, for the sake of being funny, was misinterpreting what she meant by organic. Not just the use of fertilizers, but the whole herbicide, pesticide approach to things, and it's a valid one, I realize. So I was in error there. And she got angry, and I didn't respond in anger. But so it's there. It's part of our makeup. We come to something from our background. We come to something from a culture in which we're immersed. Since we're immersed in it, it's like a fish in water. The fish doesn't see any difference, anything about what he's in it. He's just in it. He doesn't understand it. He's just there, and all his responses come from that. And I think it's something of the same way with us.
Sharon, you've been active in politics for a while, and I'm certain that you've had opportunities to exchange ideas with people that didn't agree with you. Can you talk about that to us?
You know, I think the reason that people are angry today. They're angry about a variety of things, but I call it the Jerry Springer syndrome. And I'll tell you why. Did anyone ever see the show? Has anyone seen the show?
We don't want to admit it.
You only have to see it once to make the determination that you pretty much hope these people are paid actors and actresses, because this kind of behavior in public is demoralizing, it's dehuman, and it's embarrassing. But it seems like because it was a hit, whether as a parody or a true show, you saw more and more instances of those kind of behaviors being lauded. I mean, you know, it seems like the most outrageous thing out there gets the next reality show. You know, who wants to be a millionaire? And you know, I think part of that is going on. I think part of people don't have a long attention span for a lot of things when they don't want to hear the details. They don't want to discuss the details, a lot of them. They want to know how it's going to affect them and what you're going to do to fix it. And probably I was very lucky politically. Most of the people that were involved on both sides of the aisles were they always had the best interest of the public at heart. And I think that's the difference between local government and national government. And I have a theory about that too. I think if we did true campaign financial reform, we'd cut out a lot of this. But it seems like you'll see a young person get involved in politics and they want to tell you what they want to do now, and then they're going to run for this, and then they're going to run for this. And after a while, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. You know, why don't you see if you even like this first before you plan out your next 30 years? But we've been very lucky locally. I think people do have everybody's best interest at heart. So I think they are willing to talk and find common ground and move forward. I think nationally it's a lot harder because there's a lot more elements to it, and of course the financial aspects come in at a much larger level.
Interesting that you should bring up Jerry Springer. One of the things about right and left is that we're oriented toward the grassroots, thinking that incivility starts at our level, starts at the street level. And Jerry Springer is kind of proof of that. Jerry's made a lot of money producing incivility on television. When you think about some of the political pundits like Rush Limbaugh makes millions and millions of dollars being uncivil. And that's because we like it. There's an audience for it. There's a market for it. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work against, is the grassroots market for incivility.
And perhaps the answer is we turn off the TV.
No, we get everybody else to do it. Jerry, you're sitting there with, like, you're thinking great thoughts.
Well, not great thoughts, but I'm just going back to your original question. When or have I been involved in situations where I would respond with anger? And I think that I probably have in dealing with the public and try and control that. But the thing is that I think one of the times when most of us will be angered is if we are, I don't know if the correct word is accused, but if we're attributed to doing something that we really didn't do or that we were not responsible for, and that responsibility is placed at our feet. And the person bringing that allegation seems to believe that. And so our response to that a lot of times can be in anger. And any time that we use anger, or if we use fear to get something done, we're using emotional responses. And those are probably more motivating than any reasoned response. because a reasoned response is not as easy to evaluate. It's not as easy to get on board because it does require some effort as far as thinking it through and so forth. So, and that's where I see nationally, particularly in elections, the politicians from both sides use fear to motivate voters to vote for them or to vote against the other person. And they can also use that anger, that they're angry at whatever cause or whatever person is. So those emotional responses we have to try and keep in check and put it to a reasonable response.
I think one of the reasons that the anger comes up is because there's an old saying that you can't reason somebody out of something they haven't been reasoned into. And they will form opinions based on prejudice. One of the things that I've noticed or became aware of in recent years is the fact that when there's something goes wrong, there's a big problem, people tend to blame it on somebody they already don't like. And that's an easy thing to do. And I think that global warming is probably one of them, in that that's such an easy thing to blame on corporations and power companies. And if you're
people who drive automobiles.
Well, that's not normally who gets blamed. It's the guy that made the automobile that gets the blame. But once there's an emotional attachment made to an idea or an opinion, data tends to make you very angry because, especially if it disagrees with you. And I just mentioned global warming, but there are a lot of things. People have issues with. I'm going to risk getting into an argument with somebody here, but biofuels, for instance. Well, the global warming thing, has fostered biofuels, and that the fact is that the production of corn, ethanol, to go into fuel has caused a tremendous increase in the price of food. It's caused a big increase in the price of fuel. It's caused pollution in the Mississippi River that's created a dead spot in the Gulf of Mexico, a bigger dead spot. And it's turned out to be energy neutral. It doesn't do a thing for the environment. It causes the poor a lot of trouble. But if you like the idea of the environment, biofuel sounds like a great idea, and you don't want to hear all the other things that go along with it. And I think that there are, and by the same token, Ron, we'll step to the right for a second. If you're an NRA member and you love having your gun and you're determined that the Second Amendment should be viewed favorably by the Supreme Court for the purpose of safety, that if everybody has a loaded gun on them, the crime rate will go down, and that somebody that's committed to that belief doesn't want to see any data to the contrary. Am I going off in the right direction here? I mean,
so.
do you agree with some of that?
I think so, because again, there's part of this being immersed in an environment, and if you grew up in a family with guns, if you grew up in a family with, for some reason, the conviction that individual pioneering mentality was the way to go, that's the way you're going to feel. That's going to be ingrained in you. And as again, you've not been reasoned into that approach.
Yes.
So it's hard to reason you out of it. It takes much more of a dispassionate effort and a concerted effort and an intellectual effort to change your opinion on things like that. I'm sure we've all done that on certain cases.
I wonder if some of our listening habits have a lot to do with incivility or the response that we give that would be an angry response. Because there are a lot of people listening to respond, or are they listening to actually hear what the other person is saying? If they're thinking, how am I going to counter this, instead of listening and thinking it through before I respond. And so many people feel they have to have a response. And maybe that response they feel has to be counter to what's being said. And
Let me
so
turn
again,
that
the
around
emotion
just a
gets
little
wrong.
bit, Jerry, and say the the prime mover in that discussion. Am I trying to beat you down, or am I trying to convince you of something? Am I trying to win you over or make you feel like a moron? Now, it depends on what I'm doing as to how you're going to respond. If you can see I'm trying to make you feel like a moron, you're going to be a little bit defensive, I would think.
More than a little.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
I hadn't thought about it until just a moment ago, but I've given quite a bit of thought to the idea of I hate to call it debate, discussions over a topic where the idea is not to win support for your side. It's to beat the other person down, and this is where the incivility comes in. In our our most recent election, the campaigns were that way. I mean, when you looked at what passed for a debate on television, it wasn't a debate at all. It's mudslinging.
You know, John, and I absolutely hate to see the campaigns go in that vein. And I've said several times to people that are running for office, this is the one time in your life when it's truly all about you. I don't want to hear about anything about your opponent. I want to hear all about what you want to do, what your ideas are, what your thoughts are. We've got to get away from that. Unfortunately, the strategists will tell you that type of campaigning is successful, and that's why it continues.
Well, I think John's right. It's the Jerry Springer syndrome, because the controversy and the vitriol sells. People like to watch horror movies. They like to watch these scenarios playing out. The teenagers are going into the basement, say, "Don't go there," but you're willing to let them go. All that kind of thing. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's part of our nature to want to watch a train wreck.
Well, and look at how it's expanded now. Now you've got things like the Bad Girls Club, Desperate Housewives of everywhere across the United States. And I've never really seen a lot of those shows, but you just flip through and see them, and it's just a lot of people screaming, yelling, and then they get physical with one another. And it's like, this isn't entertainment, but it is.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, just watch cable news. No, I'm dead serious. You bring on a Republican and a Democrat and let them sit there and interrupt and be rude to each other, for however long the discussion goes. But going back to the election again, it's a grassroots problem. You hold a survey. I'm just going to guess on this. This is going to be a wild guess on my part. You survey 100 people and ask them, do they like negative political campaigns? I think practically everyone is going to say no, and then they'll vote for the one that does it best. Isn't that the way it turns out?
Sadly, I think you're correct.
Although it's really interesting to think of all the money that was spent and what the results are, didn't change that much nationally.
You're right. We kept the White House and the Democrat Party. We kept the Congress and Congress on the right. And we're faced with a very, very uncivil relationship between the Speaker of the House and the President of the United States, both of whom have said, I'm not moving off my position. The President is going to raise taxes on the wealthy, whatever that means. The House says absolutely not. This fiscal cliff, I'm not sure.
Perhaps it's time to go over the fiscal cliff.
I've given that some thought.
I look at the financial situation we're in right now, and I don't want my grandchild to be saddled with that. So, you know what? Maybe it's time we suck it up, we swallow our medicine, and...
Ben Stein, a conservative commentator, he was a speechwriter for Richard Nixon.
I do remember Ben Stein.
Remember Ben? Ben said the other day on Fox News, he said, I don't know if I'm going to get out of this studio alive, but saying this on Fox News, but we have to do all these things. We have to raise taxes on the rich. We have to change the business on social. We have to do all of that if we're going to get out of this. He's absolutely right, I think.
I wonder in the current fiscal cliff standoff, if both sides of the issue really know where they're going to end up, but they have to posture and stake out their positions. So they can either claim that they fought the good fight and then figure some way to denigrate their opponents once it's all over. But they have to They have to put on a show for their supporters.
Mhm.
At least the extreme wing of whatever party they're from.
And then they have to figure out how they're going to get how they're going to get out of it and still look good.
Right, exactly right. And that's my feeling, is that, it's going to have, they're going to, the outcome is pretty much figured out. They just figure out, how do we get there and save face in the end?
May I say something? You know,
That's why you're here, Sharon.
one phrase that always impressed me is, doing the right thing is not always easy, and doing the easy thing is not always right. So a lot of times, and this has happened to me as well, is you're doing what you believe to be the most responsible thing, and you get some very loud people. I've always found that the most unhappy people are always the loudest in the room. And they're making all these, like you say, allegations that are incorrect, and you're starting to get angry because you're not getting any traction in explaining to them. But they don't want, I don't want to hear the facts. I've already made up my mind. And that's a frustrating position to be in. And I think people are, unfortunately, we still have everybody worried about the next election. And when keeping the job becomes more important than doing the job, it's time to go home.
Yeah.
End result.
The thing that I would like to see in this current debate, I mean, it is a deadlock, and Jerry is probably right. Sometime on New Year's Eve, before the ball comes down, there's going to be an agreement made. But I would love, just once, to hear each side explain with data how much revenue is going to be generated by this increase in tax on the wealthy, and what kind of an economic theory or model can be used to explain what kind of an impact that will have on job creation, taking the money out of the investment funds out of the economy. Is that real? We know that under Kennedy and under Reagan, there were tax cuts, and they produced long-term growth in the economy. There was a tax increase during the Clinton years, and we still had a long-term increase in the economy. I'd like to know, we've got access, Washington has access to some of the most brilliant economic minds in the world that can figure this out and explain it to us. But to hear one side keep talking about tax breaks on the wealthy, or to increase the wealthy to pay their fair share, and the other side is saying it's a job killer. I want data. I'd like information.
Well, the data are out there, and I'm trying to follow this as well, John. And there are lots of people trying to spell out scenarios of what would happen one way or the other. It's there. Nobody's. It's intellectual, though.
Well, and don't you think there's significant disagreement among the economists as
Well,
to
of
what
course
the
there
best
is. Of
approach
course
is?
there is.
So either side can come up with a reputable figure to say, well, listen to my guy. He's the one with all the answers. But I think common sense will allow us to agree on this. We've got to stop accumulating debt at the rate we are. I mean, I think that is unequivocally a statement everyone can agree with.
Yeah.
And we need to move forward from there.
Do you know what a jubilee is? A jubilee.
Oh,
yeah, it's every 7 years.
Every
you
7
give up-
years, you
forgive all the debts.
Actually, it's more like 50, isn't
Was it
it?
50? I thought it was 40.
Yeah.
I've
The
never
grand
heard of
jubilee.
that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's when everything gets so out of hand that we just have to start all over again. And it's
Well-
going to happen one way or another, Sharon.
Well, that's called superinflation. That would get us out of it.
I like your comment about
That part.
your comment about statistics, though. Was Mark Twain that says there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics.
Well, I don't know that we're going to settle that issue, but I'll just make this comment. Every now and then I like to get on Facebook and ask a question that I was going to annoy my liberal friends, and nobody will bother to answer them. I posted one that said that if 10% of the people are paying 71% of all the taxes, and that's not fair, what is? Nobody said anything about that. Anyway, I ask a lot of questions like that annoy my friends. You stay silent on them, these issues. You don't do that.
Because I don't know what's fair. Is it progressive or flat? What? Arguments be made either way.
Well, I have to admit the way I ask the question is really hard to answer. You know,
You're answering your own question.
I'm trying to be nice, Ron. But I'm going back to to grassroots, and that and one of the reasons I brought that up is that I'm looking at my Facebook friends as grassroots people, and it's very, very difficult to get a discussion going now that I've delisted some friends that were too vulgar to stay on my site and all. But do you think that there's a chance that we can have an impact on the man on the street, the average person, to begin to embrace civility? The Beacon Journal has an ongoing project trying to do that, and they've had a number of stories and so forth. But
The first part of that was to take a pledge. You agree of a pledge to have a discussion with somebody, somebody you know is an opposite thought from you, and try to reach some common ground to take that pledge. I didn't take it, did you?
you and I sat down for an hour and a half and didn't call each other names.
Well, that's true.
At what level of government does the negative campaigning start? I mean, here in Wadsworth, it probably doesn't start at the city council level, does it? Doesn't it? I mean, in Medina County, I don't see it too much in the commissioner level or that type of thing, does it? I mean,
We had
I
one-
saw a couple campaigns.
Well, we'll
this fall.
probably try to answer that next week. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for being here and joining us for this week's discussion, the audience as well. Our goal is to show that reasonable people can have reasonable discussions about potentially contentious topics. It takes discussions like this to peel away the layers of false information that form the basis for so many relationships. We hope you found this program to be thought-provoking and will join us for future discussions. To learn more about Right and Left, please visit our temporary website, rightandleft.org. And be patient with me while I find the right sheet that I did not put in the right place. Excuse me, John. I want to leave you with this quote. From Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.